Yet you demand another story, as if my tongue was not my own hot flesh. You retell without shiver or stammer, without feeling in a piece of your bones for a second my wounded everyday sort of joy, pain. You will never realize you cannot know. Stories reflect something deeply personal, and yet they can also be understood as expressions of broader social and political forces. They have the power to evoke emotions, affect individuals, influence opinions, and foster collectivities. Stories embody inherent contradictions. They are seen as both authentic and susceptible to distortion, idiosyncratic yet representative of wider social processes. In this paper, I try to look at the role of storytelling in organizing, and more specifically, a lot of the my own relationship with the ILO Convention 189. Storytelling was a huge part of this convention, and I reflect upon this because I back in 2023 I was part of meetings that happened back in India for ratifying the ILO Convention 189, and also growing up as a domestic worker's daughter. So I reflect on questions of positionality and reflexivity in this. So the question that I sort of seek to understand is, who does a story enable? And this I reflect in relation with the Convention 189. At the heart of this advocacy for Convention 189 were the personal accounts of domestic workers who shared with representatives from governments, unions, and employers worldwide. These narratives, grounded in the lived experiences of the workers, helped humanize the issue and created a compelling moral argument for reform. Domestic workers from various countries, each with their own stories of hardship, abuse, and resilience, underscored the urgent need for standardized international protections. These grassroots testimonies gave a voice to a previously silenced workforce, empowering them to directly influence policy decisions that would impact their lives. This is likely because storytelling holds such power in transforming personal, felt experiences into collective ones, shedding light on the tacit and bodily experiences that often exist in the shadows of economic and social valuation. In doing so, storytelling allows these experiences to be incorporated into the symbolic language of the economy. At the same time, the exploration of storytelling as practice offers a valuable contribution to the often vague discussions about the role of telling stories in political transformation. Gibson Graham consciously ties storytelling to discursive practices, using it to reshape the very terrain of discourse itself. The point of discourse is particularly important because in the ongoing global debates about the protection of domestic workers, the strategic use of storytelling has been closely linked to the portrayal of vulnerability, which has become a central element of advocacy. Domestic workers, often framed as poor women from the global south, are depicted as victims of a systematic abuse and exploitation, creating a potent narrative that advocates for their emancipation. During key policy discussions, the image of millions of poor women, many of whom are migrant workers, were frequently invoked to emphasize the urgent need for reform. This framing operates within a broader narrative that positions domestic workers as passive victims in need of rescue. While this strategy has been effective in drawing attention to the plight, it also invokes traditional gender norms by associating domestic labor with their affective realm of womanhood. By appealing to the hearts and tears of delegates, domestic workers position predominantly male policymakers as their protectors and advocates, capable of ensuring their rights through their institutional power. This emotional plea in many ways relies on a paternalistic assumption that they have historically underpinned relations of power between the global north and the global south. Beyond emotional appeal, the physical presence of domestic workers at ILO negotiation became a powerful form of symbolic representation. Through their clothing, buttons, aprons, and campaign colors, domestic workers visually signaled their presence and their collective demand for rights and protection. These visual symbols were not mere adornments, they were integral to the rhetoric strategy of the movement. By using the bodies as living representations of the historical failures to address domestic workers' rights, they forced delegates to confirm the stark realities of their labor. However, the use of bodies as symbols also raises questions about how identities are performed and represented in these spaces. At the same time, this symbolic representation gave domestic workers a level of visibility that has previously been denied. Their bodies, adorned with campaign symbols, became a form of protest and resistance, challenging entrenched power dynamics that have historically excluded them from global labor discussions. And here I'm reminded of Saidiya Hartman's analysis of the body as the property of enjoyment. I do this reflection in grappling with these dynamics. I'm reminded of my mother's experiences as a domestic worker. To explore these issues, I write a letter to her considering questions of power dynamics, the process of othering, and how empathy can sometimes function as a form of violence. The letter, titled Yellow Cup and Blue Flowers. Amma, today in class someone talked about the story of 40 acres and a mule and used the word incommensurability to describe it. I look up the word in the Oxford Dictionary, which defined it as having no common standard of measurement or not comparable in respect of value or magnitude. The thought, like almost every thought these days, led me to think of you and also of Shirley Percy. Shirley, like you, was a domestic worker. She slept in her employer's doghouse. The dog had a bed, but not us, she recounts. Stories like hers served as one of the terrible spectacles used by the global domestic workers movement, which succeeded in providing a human face to this form of employment and gaining recognition for domestic workers through the ILO Convention on Domestic Work. Standing toe-to-toe with others, her story illuminated the dehumanizing conditions faced by domestic workers. Your story, Amma, was different from Shirley's. It would not be considered a terrible spectacle. You didn't see your story as dehumanizing. You didn't view your employers as abusive or exploitative. In fact, you escaped poverty because of their kindness and generosity. Who else would have sheltered a 14-year-old girl in that big city? Who else would have sent you to school? Had they not educated you, how would you would have purchased that yellow ceramic cup with blue flowers that you so deeply cherish? I still remember the day you purchased it. Before and after that, we always drank tea from aluminium glasses, but on that day you made sugary tea and we drank it from that cup. Afterward, the cups were carefully tucked away in a safe corner and saved for special people. It was your dream to own a cup like that, similar to the one you washed in the houses you worked at. The same cup you cleaned but were never allowed to drink from. You wanted that. Unlike Shirley, you didn't stay in a doghouse, nor did you share stories of abuse like the ones she and others at the convention recount. Your story was that of everyday mundane work that all the people you knew had to do to feed their bellies. You did not organize workers. In fact, you did not even want to be associated with them. You just wanted to have tea in the yellow cup with blue flowers. What would you have thought about the stories recounted in ILO Convention 189? I wish I could ask you. But what interests me even more, Amma, is why Shirley's story constitutes a terrible spectacle and not yours. Does the terrible spectacle itself define the origin of the subject? Where do everyday feelings of hope, despair, and desire fit those evoked by the yellow cup with blue flowers? Whose recognition demonstrates the origin? If pain is the conduit of identification then whose pain constitutes as pain, and to whom? Why do stories like Shirley's become the spectacle while stories like yours get overlooked? Who is the one looking? Who are these witnesses who confirm the truth of what happened in the face of world-destroying capacities of pain, the distortions of torture, the sheer unrepresentability of terror, and the repression of dominant narratives? What does the exposure of the body living in the doghouse yield? Is it proof of the laboring body or a condemnation of the inhumanity of the peculiar institutions? Are these spectators both fascinated by and repelled by exhibitions of terror and suffering? When I read the proceedings of ILO Convention 189, an indistinct sadness wells up in me. But many would disagree, claiming that ILO Convention 189 was in fact a success. After all, it was only when they confronted the raw, unsettling parallel between the treatment of a dog and a housemaid that the urgency for global standards became undeniable, with a sharper, more piercing scope and application. Any opposition to such gruesome, real-life experiences would, after all, be seen as a blatant denial of human rights. In this process of showcasing vulnerability, however, who owns this story? The processes of storytelling form the intimate infrastructure of the resulting product, hence the images such as Shirley's that surround us. Yet, aren't these processes, like the power relations that shape them, often invisible and unspoken? Amma, you always call me a pessimist, but the purpose of these inquiries is not to cast doubt on the spectator's motives. It is to consider the precariousness of empathy and the thin line between witness and spectator. Is this what Jonathan Boyron meant by the aberration of otherness, or the superficial intimacy that enables identification with the other only when we feel ourselves into those we witness? What does it mean that the violence done to laboring bodies, or the pain existence of the laboring body, is only discernible in the most heinous and grotesque examples and not in the quotidian routines of laboring? Is the difficulty of empathy tied to both the devaluation and the overvaluation of laboring life? Audre Lorde says that sharing the power of each other's feelings is different from using another feeling as one would use a Kleenex. When we turn away from our own experiences, erotic or otherwise, we use rather than share the feelings of others who are participating in the experience with us. When we ignore the importance of the erotic in the development and sustenance of power, or when we turn away from ourselves as we satisfy our erotic needs in concert with others, we use each other as objects of satisfaction rather than share in the joy of the satisfaction or make genuine connection with our similarities and differences. But how does one travel to the othered world? How does one embed and intertwine with those othered worlds? Where do we situate ourselves, and on whose terms? What might it look like to work through incommensurability and intertwine our stories of truth? What would it mean to find echoes of ourselves in other worlds without letting our echoes appropriate unfamiliar rhythms? Yours, Diksha. Thank you.